Detective Elena Ward loved things that were tidy. Tidy desks, tidy facts, and tidy stories where the bad guy was caught and the case was closed. But on a cold, rainy Monday morning, a letter arrived that completely ruined her tidiness. Elena was a serious, brave woman with eyes that missed nothing. She had seen scary things in her job, but nothing felt as cold as the white envelope lying on her desk. The letter was sent from somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, but the stamp was smudged and strange. The paper inside was old and smelled musty, like a book left in the rain. Elena unfolded it. The handwriting was scratchy, almost rushed. It started with a name, Jacob Harlow. 7 years ago, Elena had worked on the sad final case of Jacob Harlow. He was a patient at a spooky faraway place called Black Ridge Psychiatric Hospital. The official report said Jacob had been very sad and took his own life. Elena had even seen the body bag herself, but the letter said, "If you want the truth, come to Black Ridge. They're still here, and I am still alive." Elena felt an icy chill crawl up her spine. If Jacob was dead, who wrote this? The letter wasn't just spooky words. It contained 3 solid clues. A folded map showing an abandoned part of the hospital called the East Wing. A strange, scary sentence written in big letters. The experiment never ended. A single dark fingerprint at the bottom of the page that looked tragically familiar. Elena immediately brought the fingerprint to the lab. The results came back fast and they were unbelievable. The print belonged to Jacob Harlow. He was alive. The man she thought she saw in a body bag was alive. Black Ridge. Even the name sounded like a shadow. It was a place that had been shut down for years after people started whispering about terrible things. Doctors being mean, secret testing, and patients disappearing without a trace. It was surrounded by miles of silent forest and a rusting iron fence that kept the world out. Elena called her 12-year-old nephew, Leo, who lived with her. Leo wasn't a detective, but he was a genius with puzzles and codes, and he kept Elena's messy, grown-up job interesting. "Leo, I need your help with a very big puzzle," Elena said, spreading the map on the kitchen table. "This map is from a spooky, abandoned hospital. What does 'the experiment never ended' mean?" Leo, who wore glasses and always had his nose in a book about science, stared at the phrase. "Well, an experiment means a test," Leo said, thinking aloud. "If it never ended, it means the scientists kept testing, even after the place was supposed to be closed." "Exactly," Elena whispered. She looked at the abandoned map. Jacob's letter wasn't just a cry for help. It was a promise of a terrible secret. Elena knew she had to go. She packed her backpack, feeling a nervous thrill. She wasn't just following a ghost. She was following the truth that had been buried for 7 years. The rain outside hammered against the window. Elena clutched the letter. She knew that the scariest monster isn't a ghost in the dark, but a bad person hiding in the light. And the truth about Jacob Harlow was waiting for her inside the rusting iron gates of Black Ridge. The drive to Black Ridge was long, silent, and creepy. The road got smaller and darker until Elena was driving through thick, wet forest. Finally, she saw it. Black Ridge Psychiatric Hospital. It was enormous, dark, and looked like a sad, broken castle. The rusted iron fence was bent and broken in several places. The official main gate was chained shut with thick, dusty locks. But just like Jacob's letter hinted, fresh footprints, boot prints, led under a broken section of the fence, where the wire sagged close to the ground. "Someone came through here recently," Elena muttered, pulling on her gloves. She slipped under the fence. The air immediately changed. It smelled thick, cold, and wet, like a basement after a big flood. There was also a strange, sharp smell, like old cleaning chemicals mixed with something metallic. Was that blood? Elena quickly dismissed the thought, focusing on the mission. She entered the massive building through a broken back window. The hospital was huge and felt like a maze. Dust lay on everything in thick, gray blankets. But again, she saw the fresh footprints, just a few faint marks in the dust, showing that someone was moving around inside. Elena followed Jacob's map to the East Wing. This part of the hospital was the scariest. Broken lights flickered, throwing long, jittery shadows. The walls here were different from the rest of the building. They were smeared with dirt and old charcoal. Someone a long time ago had written desperate messages. "We are still here. Don't trust the doctors." It was like the walls themselves were whispering the patient's forgotten fears. At the very end of the corridor, the map showed a room labeled B12. Elena found the metal door slightly open, creaking quietly. Inside, the room was small, with a single, rusty bed bolted to the floor. Dust covered everything, except one spot, a small, clean wooden table. On the table was a leather-bound folder. Elena's hands trembled as she opened it. The folder was full of terrible secrets, old, faded photos of patients with confused eyes, strapped to beds. Official-looking medical reports signed by Dr. Adrian Keller, the hospital's famous, and now infamous, former director. Handwritten logs detailing strange, secret experiments involving the brain. This was proof that the bad things whispered about Blackridge were true. Finally, she found the file she was looking for. Jacob Harlow's file. She flipped to the last page. The official death certificate was there, but taped over it was a handwritten note signed by Dr. Keller. The note said, "Subject removed from facility. Status? Unknown." They faked his death. Jacob had been taken for secret testing, not buried. As Elena read the terrifying sentence, a soft scraping sound echoed behind her. Scrape. Drag. She spun around, pulling her flashlight up high. No one. But on the dusty floor near the doorway, she saw them. New footprints. They weren't from the boots she wore. They were bare footprints, leading deeper into the dark, silent heart of the hospital. And they were dragging slightly, as if the person was hurt or limping heavily. Elena felt the hair stand up on the back of her neck. Jacob had come back, and he was waiting for her, deeper in the shadows. Elena swallowed hard, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The bare footprints dragging across the dusty floor were proof. Jacob Harlow was alive, injured, and moving through the maze of Blackridge. She kept her weapon drawn, but her flashlight was her only guide. The air grew colder as she moved, a damp, unnatural chill, like walking into a deep cave. The silence was broken only by the crunch of her boots on old plaster and the low, constant buzz of faulty wiring overhead. The dragging footprints led her down a flight of stairs and into a lower level that smelled strongly of mildew and old chemicals. This wasn't on the map Jacob had sent, but she trusted the clues. She paused, listening. There was a sound besides her own breathing, a sound like sandpaper, weak, raspy, and close. Elena. Her blood turned to ice. Only 2 people in her life had ever said her name with that specific tone, a gentle, almost tired lilt. One was her father, who was gone. The other was Jacob Harlow. The sound led her down a narrow, windowless corridor lined with heavy metal doors, patient cells. They were old, rusted, and terrifying. The last door on the left was barely secured by a chain that had snapped years ago. Elena carefully pushed the door open. Inside, the room was tiny and pitch black. She swept the flashlight beam around, and there he was. Curled in the far corner, shivering beneath a thin, dirty blanket, was Jacob Harlow. He was barely recognizable. His face was thin, covered by a long gray beard. His skin was pale, almost translucent, but his eyes, those large, dark eyes, were instantly familiar and bright with a fierce, desperate intelligence. He looked like a ghost who had forgotten how to fade away. Jacob tried to sit up, a painful effort that ended in a weak groan. His leg dragged heavily on the concrete floor. "You came," Jacob whispered, his voice cracking like dry leaves. "I wasn't sure you would trust a letter from the grave." Elena rushed forward, holstering her weapon. She knelt beside him. "Jacob, how are you alive? 7 years, we thought you—" "I know what you thought," he interrupted, forcing a dry smile. "Dr. Keller wanted you to think that. He wanted everyone to think Blackridge was done, that his failures committed suicide. But the experiments never stopped, Elena. They just moved underground." Elena's heart ached for him. "We have to get you out of here, Jacob." He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. I brought you here for a reason. I need to show you the truth. The real truth. The one that can shut Keller down forever." He looks suddenly frantic. The lights will come on soon. He moves on a schedule. We don't have much time. Just then, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from her nephew, Leo. Elena quickly snapped a photo of Jacob's cell number written on the wall and sent it to Leo. Elena, found the target, injured. Looks like he was right about the fake death. Be ready for the next puzzle. Jacob was weak, but his mind was sharp. Elena knew she hadn't just found a victim. She had found the key to unlock 7 years of darkness. Elena helped Jacob stand, supporting his gaunt frame. His right leg was clearly injured, explaining the dragging footprints. Keller moved me and about 20 others into the maintenance tunnels, Jacob explained, leaning heavily on the detective. The East Wing was just the waiting room. He told the world the hospital closed, but he kept running Project Chrysalis. Project Chrysalis? Elena questioned, leading him cautiously out of the cell. It means to change or to evolve, Jacob rasped, wincing with every step. Keller wasn't trying to cure sadness. He was trying to erase it, and everything else too. Fear, sadness, memory, resistance. He called it neurological conditioning, using a terrible drug he cooked up. Jacob stopped by a narrow wooden door hidden behind a stack of rusted wheelchairs. He wanted controllable people, an army of patients who would only follow orders, who wouldn't question or feel pain. He called them his echoes. Jacob explained the horror. The patients weren't recovering. They were being turned into obedient robots. They looked like people, but their eyes were vacant, just following Keller's commands. I was the prototype, Jacob confessed, his eyes darkening with memory. I was his first success. For a time. But my brain, it fought back. The conditioning failed. I became aggressive and resistant. I was scheduled for correction, Keller's word for permanent removal. How did you escape? I was strong enough to fight the drug for a few minutes, Jacob said, tapping his temple. When they were moving me from the tunnels, I struck one of the echoes and ran. I knew if I exposed him from the outside, no one would believe me. They'd just call me crazy. So I came back. Elena helped him sit on a broken bench. You came back to Blackridge? Why, Jacob? You should have run. Jacob reached inside the blanket he was still holding and pulled out a small metallic object. It glinted ominously in the flashlight beam. I returned to get this, he said, handing it to her. It was a heavy, old-fashioned master key. It was marked with a tiny, embossed K for Keller. It opens everything, Jacob said, his voice dropping low. The underground doors, the evidence rooms, even Keller's private office. He keeps it hidden in the abandoned East Wing office, the one where you found my file. I used my last strength to crawl back up here and take it. And I wrote you the letter. I knew you were the only one who wouldn't stop digging. Jacob had risked his life not just to survive, but to gather the physical proof Elena needed to bring down a monster. Just as Elena took the heavy key, a loud metallic clang echoed through the floor above them. It was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut. Then another. He's here, Jacob whispered, his eyes widening in alarm. He's locking the external doors. He knows someone is inside. Elena felt the floor vibrate. A sudden surge of power hummed through the walls. The overhead lights, which had been dark for 7 years, began to flicker and buzz to life. They threw an ugly yellow light across the dusty corridor. He never left, Jacob repeated, his fear turning into a cold certainty. Keller stayed here. He is running Blackridge from the shadows. Elena immediately pulled out her secure, tough phone. She snapped a photo of the master key and the crumpled file note in her hand. Elena. Master key secured. Keller is here and locking down the building. I'm sending you his signature and the project name. Find out everything about Chrysalis. We're trapped. The hunter had become the hunted, and the man who thought he was a ghost was about to face the monster he had escaped. The sudden, harsh light made the decaying hallways look even more terrifying. The buzzing of the old fluorescent tubes was a loud, mocking sound in the dead silence of the hospital. Elena knew they had minutes, maybe seconds. She helped Jacob crawl into a dusty utility closet while she stood guard with the master key in her hand. We need a plan, Jacob, she whispered, her voice tight. Where's the best place to find evidence that links Keller to Project Chrysalis? Jacob was trembling, not just from the cold, but from sheer terror of being caught by the man who owned his mind for years. The generator room, he rasped. Keller's main supply of the conditioning drug, the serums, they were kept near the main generator. If we can get there, we can destroy the evidence or take samples. Before they could move, a new sound echoed down the corridor. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps, not dragging like Jacob's, but slow and steady. Thump, thump, thump. And then the voice. It wasn't loud, but it carried perfectly, amplified by the hospital's empty corridors. Detective Ward, always late to the truth and bringing back the trash. Elena stepped out of the closet, putting herself between Jacob and the sound. She aimed her flashlight. Standing at the end of the long hallway was Dr. Adrian Keller. He looked exactly as she remembered him, older, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, yet chillingly calm. He looked like a kind professor, but his eyes held a cold, terrifying emptiness. He clapped slowly, the sound echoing like dry wood breaking. "Jacob, you were always a romantic failure," Keller said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I offered you peace, an escape from your troublesome memories, and you chose to become a detective's accomplice. Such a tiresome defiance." Elena raised her voice. "Dr. Keller, you are under arrest for fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and faking patient deaths. The game is over." Keller smiled, a thin, emotionless stretching of his lips. "The game has just begun, detective. You may have the master key, but I have the master plan." Keller turned his head slightly and made a small gesture with his hand. Then from the darkness behind him emerged the horrifying answer to the mystery of Blackridge. Footsteps, dozens of them, slow, shuffling, and perfectly synchronized. At least 15 people stepped into the light. They were wearing old gray hospital gowns that looked 7 years old. Their eyes were wide open but completely vacant, like dolls waiting for a string to be pulled. They were silent, obedient, and without emotion. They were the echoes, Keller's conditioned army. "Meet my successes, detective," Keller announced, gesturing grandly. "They feel no fear, no resistance, and most importantly, no loyalty except to my voice. They are the new future." The echoes began to move, taking slow, deliberate steps toward Elena and Jacob. The chase was on. Miles away at the computer, Leo stared at the 2 cryptic photos Elena had sent him, the handwritten Project Chrysalis note and the master key. Project Chrysalis, neurological conditioning, faked deaths, Leo muttered, his brow furrowed behind his glasses. This was a horror story, but he had to treat it like a logic problem. Leo used his special access codes, given to him by a friendly university library clerk who thought he was a grad student, and started researching Dr. Adrian Keller. Discovery 1. Keller's obsession. Leo found Keller's old scientific papers. Keller believed human emotion was a weakness, and that an obedient, emotionless workforce was the future. He called it achieving emotional perfection. Discovery 2. The location. Leo compared the map Elena sent him to the old blueprints of Blackridge. He realized the East Wing was built right above the hospital's massive generator room, the power source. Discovery 3. The conditioning. Leo cross-referenced chrysalis with the drugs listed in the faint medical log Elena had sent earlier. He found a strange chemical compound that, when administered in high doses, was known to severely damage the part of the brain responsible for independent thought and fear responses. "A drug that erases fear," Leo whispered, tapping his pencil. "That's why those patients are still here. They're not victims of madness. They're victims of science." Leo realized the full terror of Keller's plan. The patients weren't just test subjects. They were now his loyal, emotionless security system. They wouldn't question a command, no matter how dangerous or cruel. Elena's phone pinged again. It was a rapid-fire string of texts. "Elena. Echoes surrounding us. Must find the generator room. Where is the fastest way?" Leo quickly brought up the blueprints. "Okay, Aunt Elena. Think. Where do people hide things they want to keep cold and safe?" He typed a frantic reply. "East Wing maintenance tunnels lead down. Follow the air vents. Generator room is connected to the old kitchen storage. Floor below you. Look for the largest metal door." Leo's calm, logical thinking was Elena's only lifeline. She was fighting a physical battle. He was fighting a mental one, deciphering the blueprints of a monster. He knew that if Keller caught Elena and Jacob, it wouldn't just be an arrest, it would be the end of the truth. He had to keep feeding her information until the police could arrive, if they could even find the isolated hospital. Elena didn't waste a second. She grabbed Jacob's arm, dragging him toward the lower East Wing entrance he had crawled out of. "Generator room, Jacob," she hissed. "We need to get to the supply of the serum. It's our only proof." Keller watched them retreat, his face calm and cold. He didn't even raise his voice. He just issued a single, terrifying command to his followers. "Subjects," Keller ordered, "secure the target known as Jacob Harlow, contain the intruder." The echoes moved. They didn't run. They moved with a horrifying, smooth, shuffling speed, their eyes locked on Jacob. There was no emotion in their faces, no anger, just the perfect, mechanical obedience Keller had engineered. Elena and Jacob plunged down the dirty staircase into the darkness, guided by the flickering light of Elena's phone screen, following Leo's panicked directions. The corridors twisted and turned, feeling like the inside of a monstrous machine. Jacob gasped, his injured leg barely supporting him. "This way," Jacob pointed to a heavy, dark metal door labeled Storage C. "It connects to the old kitchen. It's the fastest way to the generator." They burst through the door, finding themselves in a massive, dirty kitchen covered in years of grime. The echoes were right behind them. Elena could hear their shuffling, rhythmic steps closing in. They raced toward the back of the kitchen, where a set of industrial freezers stood against the wall. Just as they reached the freezers, Keller's voice boomed over the hospital's ancient, crackling PA system. "You can't escape, Jacob. The hospital has sealed every exit. The woods are locked. Stop running and accept your correction." Elena looked at Jacob. "He's right, Jacob. We can't run outside. We have to make a stand or find help." Jacob's eyes were blazing with defiant courage. "We destroy the serums. Then we destroy the generator. We ruin his perfect society." They found the generator room door. It was heavy steel, bolted shut. Elena reached into her pocket, pulling out the master key. Her hands were shaking too badly to insert the key into the lock. "Hurry," Jacob urged, looking back. The echoes had entered the kitchen. Their vacant eyes found them. 15 figures, moving slowly, surely closing the gap. They were coming, not with anger, but with perfect, terrifying focus. Elena finally got the master key into the lock. It clicked loudly, the sound echoing their desperation. She shoved the heavy steel door open, pulling Jacob inside. The generator room was a chaotic mess of roaring machinery, thick cables, and dusty control panels. It was loud and vibrating, perfect cover. Elena quickly barricaded the steel door with a heavy steel locker she shoved across the entrance. "The ventilation shaft!" Jacob shouted over the noise, pointing to a dark grate high on the wall. "That leads to the courtyard. If we can reach the fence..." Before he finished, Keller's voice cut through the PA system again, closer this time, sounding smug and cold. "The ventilation shafts are locked, Detective. I've known about that shortcut since 1998. You're trapped." Keller knew every corner of his monster machine. Elena rushed to the center of the room, looking for the serum supply Jacob had mentioned. She found a large refrigerated unit humming softly in the corner. Inside, rows upon rows of small vials glowed with a sickly yellow liquid, the chrysalis serum. "We have to destroy this now," Elena yelled. Jacob hobbled over, grabbing a fire extinguisher. "I can short the main power line. It will destroy the generator and the refrigerator." Suddenly, a loud wrenching sound came from the barricaded door. The echoes were pushing the steel locker aside. The metal groaned and screamed under the slow, steady pressure of their commanded strength. Elena pulled her firearm, aiming it at the door, but she couldn't shoot unarmed patients, even conditioned ones. She pulled out her phone and sent Leo one final urgent message. "Elena, generator room, destroying evidence. Cannot hold the line. Need an immediate distraction." Then she turned and yelled, "Jacob, hit the power switch." Jacob didn't hesitate. He swung the heavy fire extinguisher at the main breaker box. Sparks flew. A massive crack of electricity filled the air, and the room was plunged into total, terrifying darkness. The roar of the generator died instantly. The only light was the tiny red indicator light blinking on Elena's phone. The The silence was deafening, the darkness absolute. The door burst open with a terrifying screech of twisting metal. The echoes had entered the generator room. Elena pushed Jacob to the floor and held her breath. She could hear them, shuffling, heavy breathing, and the sickening sound of clothing moving in the pitch black. They were inside. She fumbled in her vest pocket and found an old, powerful flashlight she always carried, her backup. She flicked it on, but kept the beam pointed at the ceiling, trying to disorient them. The dim, bouncing light illuminated the horror. 3 of the echoes stood motionless between them and the ventilation shaft, their eyes like glass marbles. They weren't moving because they couldn't see Keller to receive a new order. The dark had confused their simple programming. Suddenly, a chilling sound ripped through the silence. A loud, slow clap. Keller was back on the PA system, his voice amplified and booming right into the generator room. Lights off. Target still present. Find them. Eliminate the prototype and secure the evidence. The conditioned patients immediately unfroze. They turned, their vacant eyes finding the bouncing light, and started to move toward the sound. Elena fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space. Plaster and glass shattered around the room, but the echoes didn't flinch. They felt no fear. Jacob was struggling to load the fire extinguisher with a small camera kit, hoping to take photos of the refrigerated vials. "They're not stopping," Elena hissed, aiming for the wall beside the nearest echo. "They're immune to fear." Jacob looked at her, his face grim in the weak light. "Shoot the floor near their feet, Elena. Break their rhythm." Elena fired 2 rounds into the concrete floor. Dust exploded. The echoes stumbled slightly, momentarily breaking their lockstep obedience. It gave Jacob the precious time he needed. He quickly snapped 4 photos of the refrigerated unit in the vials of serum. Proof secured. But the echoes were closing in, their hands outstretched, ready to grab. Elena was cornered, her bullets running low, and Keller was closing the distance, his voice now a low, triumphant purr over the intercom. Just as the nearest echo reached out and grabbed Elena's shoulder, ready to restrain her, the world outside Blackridge roared to life. A loud, piercing, insistent sound cut through the silence of the forest. Police sirens, not one, but many, wailing toward the hospital. The sound was so sudden, so loud, that Dr. Keller's voice on the PA system cut out mid-sentence. The 15 conditioned patients, the echoes, suddenly froze. Their heads tilted slightly, like dogs hearing a confusing command. Their eyes, though vacant, searched for guidance that wasn't coming. They were programmed for obedience to Keller, but they were not programmed for the chaos of a full police emergency response. Elena shoved the echo off her. "Jacob, the plan worked!" Hours earlier, before entering the abandoned facility, she had done the smartest, tidiest thing a detective could do when investigating a ghost story. She activated her hidden emergency tracking beacon, a tiny device secured to her belt to transmit her location to the state police if she didn't check in within 2 hours. The sirens were a direct response to her silence. "Leo!" Jacob gasped, realizing the brilliance of the outside help. Keller was heard running down the corridor, his footsteps now frantic, panicked, and human. His perfect calm control was shattered. "He's running!" Elena shouted, grabbing the master key. "We finished this!" She and Jacob hobbled out of the generator room. The echoes were still frozen, receiving conflicting input from the chaos. They found Keller trying to secure the master key back into his office lock. He was sweating, his face losing its cold calm. Now just a man desperate to hide his crimes. "You ruined everything!" Keller screamed at Elena, making a grab for the key. Elena didn't hesitate. She tackled him low, knocking the scientist to the ground. The master key skidded across the floor. Jacob, despite his injured leg, lunged and snatched the key. Before Keller could get up, Jacob swung the master key, not to hurt him, but to secure him. He used the chain from the heavy key as a temporary restraint, tying Keller's hands behind his back. "7 years of my life, Keller," Jacob said, his voice raw with hard-won justice. "The experiment is finally over." The windows of the hospital began to shatter as law enforcement officers breached the building. The sound of shouting, the flashing lights, and the movement of the outside world finally invaded the dark, controlled silence of Blackridge. By dawn, Blackridge Hospital was crawling with police and emergency medical teams. The building, which had hidden terrible secrets for so long, was now illuminated by flashing red and blue lights, finally exposing the truth. Jacob Harlow was rushed to a safe medical facility. He was weak and injured, but free. Dr. Adrian Keller was arrested, his suit jacket torn, his face pale with defeat. He was charged with murder, human experimentation, unlawful imprisonment, and the destruction of evidence. The scariest discovery was made by a team led by Detective Elena Ward. Using the master key and Jacob's guidance, they found the sealed underground rooms. They weren't cells. They were sophisticated laboratories. And inside, hundreds of sealed patient files, the records of every patient who had been declared dead or missing over the past decade. Keller hadn't just faked Jacob's death. He had faked dozens, moving them into his hidden project to create his obedient workforce. Blackridge Hospital was demolished within months. The rust, the mold, and the dark experiments were finally reduced to dust and debris. Elena visited Jacob in the hospital a few weeks later. He was recovering, eating, and most importantly, smiling. "You saved me, Elena," Jacob said, holding the master key she had given back to him as a souvenir. "You saved yourself, Jacob," Elena replied, sitting beside him. "You had the courage to tell the truth, even when no one believed you." Elena thought about the whole terrible story. The monster wasn't the insane patient. It was the doctor who stole minds. The scariest place wasn't the dark forest, it was the building built to heal. Later that week, Elena returned home to Leo. She found him sitting at his computer, analyzing the data they had secretly pulled from Keller's files. "We did it, Aunt Elena," Leo said, his eyes shining with triumph. "We solved the biggest puzzle of all." Elena smiled, giving him a huge hug. "Yes, we did, Leo. You decoded the madness. You were the light in the dark." Elena finally realized that her tidiness wasn't about having a clean desk. It was about bringing order and justice to the chaos and lies of the world. She had followed a ghost, trusted a hunch, and exposed a monster hiding in a lab coat. Jacob Harlow finally got justice and closure, and Elena Ward, the detective who believed the impossible, learned that sometimes the greatest courage isn't found in a fight, but in simply refusing to let the truth stay buried.